Hi there, and welcome back to yet another episode at Station Road. Now, we're so quick off the heels of the previous episode, which was looking at this Hornby TSX decoder, that I haven't even had time to have a shave. So I did a little bit further investigation, and of course with the help of some further YouTube channel documentation, I managed to actually find some quite full-on documentation that actually comes directly from Hornby. So I think without further ado, let's just get into what I discovered. What I've actually found is there is some reasonably good documentation, but I wouldn't actually say it was terribly easy to find. Once again, it was a case of going through some other YouTube channels and actually following what sort of information they actually found out, and there is actually quite an extensive full manual, 130 pages in a digital PDF format on their website. Now, my main concern, I think, really is that looking through this box and through this sort of quick start guide that came with the decoder, there's no real sort of in-your-face indication where to access this manual. So on the box, it is actually on the back, and it is tucked down here. There's a QR code, and it says scan the QR code to download the full specifications instruction manual. So it's sort of shoved away down at the bottom of the back of the box, and then you've got the QR code up here to download the app, which of course is important, but I really feel like this needs to be up here somewhere alongside this, or somewhere up the top, or even actually on the front of the box. And I kind of really feel like it needs to be called out, this item here, this code for the full manual, and even for it to say something like, please go to this before doing anything. So that's where it's indicated on the box. Can be easily missed being down here. A lot of people just don't bother reading this information down the bottom. And then on the quick start guide, we've got our folded quick start guide. It's quite a large sort of paper document here with the brief quick start information. And if we go to the back, because we start at number 1 here, we go through a series here, 4, 5, 6, and then way down here, tucked away in the bottom corner, is this tiny little QR code, tiny little lettering that says full HM7000 digital manual available here. That's just nuts. I mean, it's almost like they're deliberately trying to hide it, almost as if they don't really want you to look at the full manual. So that sort of cleared that up. So I will say now, from the previous video where I sort of claimed, or at least thought, that there was very little to no decent documentation, there actually is. So I'll eat my words on that one. So of course, once I actually started delving into the documentation they had hidden away on the Hornby website, it soon became clear that it is very much a work in progress type of system, and there is quite a few little bits of information tucked away in various places that provide some warnings to what you can and can't do with the system, and what kind of power adapters or power controllers you can't use or you can use, what type of running systems you can and can't use. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to how they set this out with the documentation, they really need to call that out. It needs to be on the front of the box. It needs to be in this quick start guide that please read this information before you start, because I think that is really where I've found or have heard of people having quite a few issues with these decoders and even destroying their decoders. So yeah, it's just a fundamental thing that I think Hornby have missed. So once you scan this tiny little wee QR code, either on this documentation or from the back of the box, of course that takes you to the support page for the HM7000, and I popped a link in the description below, of course, that gives you a little bit of easier access to all this information, because the QR code, yes, you scan it, you use your phone to scan that, then really at the end of the day, ideally you just sort of don't want to wade through a 130 page manual on your phone. So of course I copied that URL from my phone so that I could open everything up on the computer, on the desktop, the laptop, and be able to actually go through some of the information. So looking at the support page, of course there is a number of categories there, and of course the bottom one is actually the full manual. There's also some text-based guides, so they take you into individual PDF documents relating to specific areas. So the text-based guides are probably quite handy because they're a bit briefer than the full manual. There's also, quite importantly, I think right at the top, is the compatibility issues, or the lack of compatibility with certain things, certain devices, certain running systems. And by clicking on these you can actually go in and actually have a look at the compatibility status. So the first one, of course, is actually what phone systems or smartphones are compatible, and of course any Android phone is not compatible at the moment, and they've of course got a column there that indicates what compatibility they're currently working on but haven't yet resolved. And then of course there are actually some devices there, some phones there, that are never going to be compatible. So you know, this stuff really needs to be made clear before people start going out and buying these decoders and then finding out they can't use them. So in the second document, in this compatibility section, of course there is the power supplies that are currently compatible to operate these Bluetooth decoders, and I'm really quite surprised with this list as well. I think this really needs to be called out as well. And even the Hornby power supplies that you might currently have, whether it be a Select, an Elite, or even the HM6000, and also I think the Railmaster or whatever it's called, they're really sort of a bit patchy in terms of compatibility. So I sort of wonder whether this compatibility list is going to be updated as they develop the decoders and the app a little bit further. So in terms of the compatibility, there of course is a list of power packs at the top, which are Hornby, I'm guessing Hornby ones, but really they sort of state the amps and the voltage requirements. Then you've got the Select and Elite, and interestingly, the further you go down the list, there is a number of devices that they really just, there is no compatibility, or it's very, very sketchy at the most. And interestingly, in the third column, which is the DC analog operation, there is nothing there to suggest that they're willing to claim it's compatible to use an analog mode. And I think that's where a lot of people have got muddled up and confused, because I could certainly imagine from the point of view of, say, a modeler who has a DC operated layout, they've got a basic Hornby controller, and of course in this list even some Hornby controllers that aren't actually compatible at all, and they thought, great, I can finally get into sound fitted locomotives and operate them on my DC analog layout. And the interesting thing is, it is just not true. That it's not possible to have a sound fitted loco that operates the sounds that you can play on your locomotive under DC analog control. It's a misconception, I think, and I think Hornby have kind of not really made it very clear there. The only way you can have a locomotive that has sound control, that you can switch it on and off, that you can play the horn, do all of those kind of things, is through the Bluetooth app. It has to be through the Bluetooth app. So yes, you might have a DC analog controller that has variable speed on it, that you would naturally normally control an analog locomotive, in other words a locomotive with no chip in it. But in order to operate this new HM7000 system, you do operate your trains through Bluetooth, and you need a smartphone, and currently at the moment you can only actually use Apple devices. So yeah, there's not a lot of clarity there from Hornby, I think. So DC analog is definitely out. And then the second thing is, okay, you've got a DC analog controller with the dial control as I sort of demonstrated in the previous video, but you're happy to operate your locomotives with your phone. You've got an iPhone, you've got an iPad, you're able to do that. Then the second thing really is, you've got to really find out whether your current analog controller is actually up to scratch, whether it's actually suitable for these decoders. So if that's said, and specifically relating to DC analog controllers, of course immediately I was concerned whether the use of this controller here, the Spectrum Magnum controller that I was using in the previous video, was up to scratch or suitable for powering the locomotives and of course the Bluetooth chip. So in their documentation they firstly state, I think it shouldn't really exceed 20 volts, and the sort of optimum range is really between 12 and 15, but certainly not past 20 volts. And there is some documentation buried in the full manual that sort of goes into that with some detail. But with my multimeter, I just wanted to actually check to see what voltage this controller I was using actually puts out, and how consistent the actual voltage was at maximum speed or maximum output. So I'm just placing the terminals on the track, and we've got 17.7978, 7978, 17.8 we saw there. So the power seems to be relatively consistent, and it's just a shade under 18 volts. So I'm hoping really that this controller is actually reasonably safe to use with these Bluetooth decoders. So the second thing I actually wanted to test as well with the multimeter, of course, is my DCC setup here as well. So as I mentioned in the previous video, this is my programming track, which is controlled with JMRI on a Arduino. So I'll be curious to see what the output voltage is for this. So I'm just going to pop these on, and we have a 16.3, 16.2, 16.23, so it's just coming in over 16 volts for the DCC setup. So it's pretty much consistently in range with Hornby's guidelines. So as I mentioned in the previous video, of course, I will actually have another go with another decoder, which I'll order a few more and try out some other locomotives. Now, what I'm actually thinking I might do is, rather than set up the locomotive and the sound profiles and so forth using the analog controller, I might actually give it a go under the DCC power and see how it works. So as you can see, there is actually quite a reasonable wealth of information available from Hornby regarding this new Bluetooth decoder system. And the only issue that I really see here, it was actually a little bit difficult to find it in the first place. So I'm hoping that this week update gives you more of an insight and maybe gives you a much better understanding of this TSX Bluetooth decoder and its accompanying app, so that you can get a better idea of whether it's something that you want to embark on. Now, one of the other aspects that I did discover in the initial video that I did is that I actually got the chip plugged in the wrong way around in the locomotive. Whoops. So although it worked, I think that could be one of the main causes of why the DC address wouldn't actually store itself correctly within the chip. So what I'll be doing is actually I'm going to run through that same install setup process that I previously did. I'll do that off camera. I just wanted to see whether having the chip the wrong way around might have had something to do with it. Of course, with the 21 pin and the 18 pin chips, there is really only one way you can actually install those decoders, so there shouldn't really be any problems with those. So as I mentioned in the initial video, I will be ordering some more of these decoders, and I'll have a crack at another locomotive and just see whether any of these issues come up again or whether everything is sort of more or less being resolved. So I'll leave it there for this episode. I certainly hope you've gained some further insight and additional information into this app, and also finding out where you can get hold of all the documentation, which I have included a link in the description for that. So do take care, everyone. Look after yourselves. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.